Anti-Afro Svengali coming on here to get back with you to make sure I provide some very important information behind some very, very disturbing, inaccurate, misleading, dangerous, and destructive lies that Umar Johnson posted on the video that had just a mash bash hodgepodge concussion grenade style litany of just garbage pail information about domestic violence, sexual assault, and this ambiguous term of abuse that Umar Johnson posted. I posted a very, like a forewarning that I was going to come back on here, but I'm not going to be addressing all of those topics in one. I'm only going to be addressing the topic of domestic violence because the subject matter that Umar Johnson threw together, it can't be addressed in one video. So it was very important that I came back on here to make sure our people have accurate information about a very serious topic, because Umar Johnson did leave information that was extremely not only disturbing, but misleading, that could cause people to get into serious trouble legally and put your life at risk and to potentially lose your life. And I'm being very serious about that. So Umar Johnson made some statements, and one of the statements that he made, which was out and outright, I'll call it a lie, because when he said it, I'm like, how in the world would he be able to say this? Because it's not in any basis of fact. He said that most domestic violence cases are felonies. That's why Black women don't want to report. He just pulled that out of, I don't know, one of the orifices that he has, and you can guess which one. I won't say it. I'm going to address that specifically, but before I do, I wanted to point out something very, very interesting that Umar Johnson just completely just blew over. Didn't think to even address, because he's not even versed in any areas of domestic violence. He's just talking out of an orifice. He didn't even address the issue of domestic violence that's not even in criminal court, and that has to do with restraining orders. He didn't even talk about that. Why did he not even address restraining orders, which is not even in criminal court? Now, restraining orders, or in Pennsylvania called protection from abuse. Now, since he is in that state, you would think he would at least address that and discuss that, because those are all types of dynamics. He professes to be this expert in relationships, but he didn't even talk about that. Didn't even mention PFAs or restraining orders, because in my state, they're called restraining orders. Didn't even talk about it. So how can you talk about domestic violence when you don't even talk about restraining orders? Completely didn't even talk about it. So we're not even in criminal court yet. So I'm not going to even talk about that. So how do restraining orders come about? They come about in many different ways. They come about because other people may call attention to the fact there's been violence and aggression in the home or between two people. And other agencies get involved. Case in point, CPS. It may be called a different agency in your state, but I'll just say CPS because everybody knows what CPS is. No matter what agency a county tries to call it, everybody knows what CPS, Child Protective Services. They may get involved because somebody has reported that there's domestic violence in your home. One of your children may report it to someone, and here comes CPS asking questions. And they may lean on the family about somebody needs to file a restraining order. See, the police are not even involved at this point. The person who is on the receiving end of aggression may decide they're going to go in and file a report. Now, what's interesting that Umar Johnson, throughout his whatever that was he put on the internet, he kept saying the woman, the female, the woman, the female, the woman, the female. Okay, yes, we do know because men are stronger. We know this, that women in numbers tend to be reported to be more of the victim. That is irrelevant. It is equally relevant that men are potentially victimized in much higher numbers, regardless of the degree of injury. So we're not going to say we need to protect women more than we need to protect men, because domestic violence is domestic violence regardless of the injury. And of course, we don't want loss of life. But I'm just talking about the issue of domestic violence regardless of the degree of injury. So it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman or child or elderly or teenager. I'm just talking about domestic violence across the board. So I just want to make sure that's very clear. I'm not putting a gender emphasis on it at this point. Okay, so I'm really focusing on that. So I wanted to make sure you knew that the federal government changed the agency to Office of Victims of Crime, not Office of Victims of Crimes Against Women, which was years and years ago. So they don't even have a gender identification on that agency. So it doesn't matter the gender of the person. But Umar Johnson spent most of the time talking about women this, women that, and then he makes these offensive statements against women, which you already know about that because I put a video on about that. But he doesn't even talk about the restraining order issue. So here's the other concern that I have. Umar Johnson, as you all know, claims to be all of these professional titles, and he doesn't even mention his mandated responsibilities to report to CPS or to contact law enforcement in certain situations. And those situations are, now, if two people, and it doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter if it's a woman and a man, two men, two women, transgender, it makes no difference. If they are engaged in a violent encounter and that comes to the attention of a mandated reporter, and mandated reporters are teachers, like school personnel, doctors, who else? I'm blanking. Any health professional, the police, of course, if they're aware of it and they see it. Anyone who is aware of a violent encounter between two people and children are present, or children tell you about it, or you hear about it, you are required to make a report to Child Protective Services. If you do not make that report, it is a misdemeanor criminal offense. Not only that, the state can come after your credentials, whatever credentials you have. So if he has educational credentials, or if he is a therapist, not only are they going to come after you criminally, they can come after your credentials to revoke your credentials. They're going to bring you up on charges. So he didn't even talk about that. And Umar Johnson has made it very clear how he feels about Black people working with the police. He doesn't think we should work with the police. So how can he be existing in these, going around talking about and bragging about these degrees and licenses when he doesn't even abide by the standards? He didn't even talk about mandated responsibility. And he says he was a principal at this school, and he's a school psychologist, and I am a therapist, but he never talks about CPS and reporting. How can you be working for 20 years, quote unquote? And he has never, ever, ever mentioned making a report to CPS. In that crazy video he made, he talked about a child had a baby and it looked like the dad, and it was a controversy about whether or not the person should have had an abortion, and then when they didn't have an abortion, they had the kid, and the kid beat up. The mother ended up beating up the kid because it looked like the dad. He didn't once mention. How come there was no CPS report? He didn't even talk about why wasn't this person arrested, the adult, for beating up the child. He doesn't even care about people being abused, and that's domestic violence in addition to child abuse. He didn't even mention that. He didn't even do anything. So here we are. We're not even in criminal court yet. That's why I didn't even go there yet. He completely glossed over that. That's why I'm trying to tell you people, if you have Umar Johnson around your kids and they disclose that somebody did something to them, uncle, cousin, somebody else, he is not even going to protect them. He's not even going to do anything about it. All this bloviating about he's so big and bad, he's not even going to turn the person into the police. Although it doesn't matter how you feel about the cops or the police. He is duty bound by law to report child abuse and domestic violence when children are known to be present or suspected to be present, because we don't investigate the allegation. We are not supposed to investigate it. When we hear about it, we are to make the report, but he is not going to do that. So that tells you again how little or none at all that he cares about you or your children. And it doesn't even need to be you involved. It could be your child went to a slumber party or went to camp. Your kid is not going to be protected with Umar Johnson. He's not going to follow any of the regulations. Nobody likes all the regulations in your profession, but he's bragging about having all these positions, but he's not going to follow them. So we're not even in criminal court yet, people. And here you are. So he didn't even talk about that. So that shows you how next to nothing he knows about domestic violence. So now let's move on to the criminal court. He says that Black women don't report to domestic violence because it's a felony. First off, if any issue was colorblind in terms of dynamics, it's going to be domestic violence. The dynamics that exist when it comes to domestic violence and interaction with the legal systems, it's going to be this situation here, because in virtually every single culture, the dynamics exist and they're virtually identical. Yes, there may indeed be similarities, but here is the equalizer, people, about reporting and statistics. It's actually irrelevant, and it actually doesn't matter, because he gave something like 15% of Black women, which is another statistic he pulled out of an orifice, because the FBI doesn't even keep those kinds of statistics that he mentioned. That's not what the FBI would keep. Other agencies, which you see right here, would be keeping those types of statistics, and he would have to find a very specific research report to keep that statistic that he mentioned, Black women. He just threw that in there because that, again, the FBI doesn't keep that type of statistic. So, and he didn't mention any of these agencies, and I know he doesn't even know about them. And the reason why I'm saying that, because I mentioned early in some other videos that I used to write grants. And the reason why I'm aware of this, because professors, in order to get promoted, one of the things that they have to show, among many, is that they're doing work in the community. And what I would do with these professors, we would write grants with different agencies. So we've written domestic violence grants, although we may not be the lead on the grant because they were not as experienced with the grants. We would basically write it for them, write it up. They would be the lead. We would get like a big chunk of the money. In other grants, we would be the lead, but we would be doing most of the work. So it's a collaboration with different agencies, with the police department. We would write the grants. They would have a certain part of it. You would have to show that you are involved in the community working. We would hire people from the community to work and collaborate. So you have to show, the professors have to show that they're involved with the community. So that is why I know about these different things. Delinquency prevention grants, all these different grants are going through the government with all these different types of services that are being provided to the community. You bring people onto campus, you go into the community, and it shows that the university and the professor and the department is involved and cares about the people in the community. So it's a collaboration. I don't know anything about Umar Johnson doing anything like this. The only thing that he does is go into certain parts of the community, and he only addresses certain people. He doesn't collaborate from the university to the community. He doesn't even talk to professors. He stays away from professors because he's afraid they're going to know he doesn't have these credentials. He doesn't do any work based from the university unless he's working with a student group. Great. We work with student groups. They were hired on our grants. But Umar, it's this big piece missing. He doesn't work with professors. It's bizarre. It is so bizarre. Okay, let's get to the statistic about this 15 percentages. I didn't even write the percentage up here because he was throwing out all these statistics and they weren't even accurate. It's the bunch of, it doesn't matter, because here's why it doesn't matter. Most of the now we're on the criminal side now, criminal cases, criminally related domestic violence issues come to the attention of the police by someone other than the victim. And that is a fact. Doesn't mean victims never call. Of course, we know that's not true. By and large, it's somebody else that's calling. It's the neighbor calling. It's the passerby calling. It's driving by in the car. It's the school calling. It's a child that said, my mom's didn't wake up this morning. She's in bed and she won't wake up. I mean, all kinds of stories that you'll hear. Neighbors, other relatives, friends, strangers. I saw something in the store. I thought this man put his wife in a car or a lady in the car and the kid was crying. It is rare. It is very rare that the victim of the offense is going to call. My mom hit my dad with a hammer and he has this thing on his head and she keeps hitting him with the hammer. Kids telling somebody at school. A janitor overhears somebody talking. Someone in the cafeteria sees somebody crying and they go, what's wrong? Oh, my parents were fighting last night and my dad fell on me and my ankle hurts or something. You'd be surprised, people. And here's the thing. People think that they know who reported something a lot of times, and you don't. Sometimes you don't really know who reported it because they don't tell you. It could be any number of people. But a lot of times the person who's being beat up isn't the one that calls. And unfortunately, it's really sad. You think if a woman jumps on the man and she's beating him to a bloody pulp, that he'll be the one that calls? No. But even then, the woman doesn't call. She's screaming and crying and the neighbors call. So those percentages that he tried to put up there, it's not even relevant. So here's the other part I want to make sure I put in here. When the police arrive. Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there have had some experiences and know people. In all 50 states, and this is tied to federal money, so there's no way out of this legally for police. They arrive on the scene. They are required to make an arrest if there's an injury to anybody. Okay? Say the person has a scratch. Say the man has a scratch on his face and the woman has scratches too. They're going to have to decide based on their interview who was the aggressor. And people, I'm trying to tell you, it's not always the man that gets arrested. I know so many situations where women, females, are arrested for domestic violence. It happens. That's why they removed that Office of Women Violence Against Women. It's Victims of Violence, Office of Victims of Crime. This is equalizing out. It's equalizing out. And if a woman kills a man, it's going to be usually with a weapon. We know that because obviously odds are, unless the man is passed out cold, a woman is not going to be able to strangle him to death. Odds are. Most are just not going to happen like that. So Umar Johnson acting like there's some special reason why black women won't do this with domestic violence. It's not relevant because they don't need the victim to testify. It is a required arrest. It is a mandatory prosecution. You don't even need the victim. And the reason for that is a lot of lives were lost because victims would recant. So there's a very special protocol that the police use when these situations occur. The states have mandatory punishments for first-time offenders, and it's going to be a misdemeanor in more than quadruple the cases, which doesn't mean there's never any felony, because there are felonies, of course, because we know people serious injury and death. But most of the cases are misdemeanor. So Umar Johnson is incorrect when he's telling you this. So for him to put out this information is just absolutely, it's so irresponsible. I don't know, it's just making this stuff up. So the other thing about Umar Johnson that is so just incredibly disturbing is that he didn't even say anything to anybody about safety. And it's very odd because he's on the East Coast, right? And this all came about, the misdemeanor situation and domestic violence. It all originated on the East Coast. So how come he doesn't know this? Frank Lautenberg was the one that got this law passed in he got it started in 1996 and 1995. And since Umar Johnson hates cops so much, why doesn't he know about this? It's the Lautenberg bill. That was a huge overhaul to the gun law after Martin Luther King was killed and John F. Kennedy. Like when Martin Luther King was assassinated, the Congress said that's enough. We got to do something. So they overhauled the gun laws. So that was the largest overhaul of our gun laws. There were so many police officers and others, but there were a lot of cops who were beating the padoobies out of their wives and girlfriends. Now, back then, this was more of a gender issue, and they still were on the force. It was out of control, people. It was so out of control. So you have a white Jewish senator from New Jersey who put this bill through, who pushed this bill, which states a lifetime ban on owning a firearm if you have a misdemeanor domestic violence conviction, with some conditions, but that was primarily the issue. So the law enforcement community was up in arms. So I can't believe Umar Johnson didn't even talk about this. And he's supposed to be the expert, right? Oh no, you're not going to take our guns away. Want to bet? It passed. So this meant retroactively, cops with misdemeanor domestic violence convictions lost the right to carry firearms. And when you can't carry a firearm, you can't be a cop. So scores of cops lost their jobs. That's right. You better believe it, people. And for life. It's a lifetime ban. A lifetime ban. You can't ever again carry a firearm if you have a misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence. If you have a restraining order, you can't carry it until the restraining order goes off and the court will decide whether or not you can have the gun back. If you have a felony, this is the dicey part. If you have a felony conviction, it's not a permanent ban. That's the interesting part. You have the potential to work to get that gun back. Potential. But here's the thing with cops. If you have a felony conviction, you can't be a cop. So that takes care of that. That's what they were arguing about. You can't get hired to be a cop anyway if you have a felony conviction. So that takes care of that issue. But the cops were getting away with, I don't have a felony conviction. I have a misdemeanor. I get to keep my gun. Not anymore. But here's the thing. They challenged this law up to the Supreme Court and it stood. So for people who think the cops get away with everything, they don't. They just don't put it on the news, people. Okay? They don't get away with everything. They just don't advertise it. So you cannot carry a gun ever again in life or own one if you have a misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence. So this is again why Umar Johnson is wrong. And also another reason why he's wrong, misdemeanor domestic violence conviction comes in at number 3 as the number 3 reason why people are rejected when they try to purchase a firearm. So Umar Johnson can't be correct again by saying most domestic violence cases are felonies. So he's wrong again. So just coming out and saying this stuff is just talking out of nowhere. Perhaps the most disturbing part about Umar Johnson's whatever he was saying is that he came on the internet going on and on and on about why he canceled this June 2nd thing. He said he didn't have security, and I can't go nowhere without security. And I got people on Umar Johnson this, and 5% of the people, 95% of the people love me, but there's 5% that want to do me harm, and all. He went on and on about how important his life and safety was. Okay, I have no problem with anybody. I am not passing judgment on any person who feels they need safety and protection. Although Umar Johnson ragged on SETI, remember that, people? Saying he needed protection. I don't care if you get protection, one way or the other. Umar Johnson is the one putting himself into those contraptions and coming back and looking like a fool. Get the protection if you want the protection. Who cares? The point I'm making, Umar Johnson didn't once in this video about the domestic violence part tell anyone, man, woman, child, elderly, teen, any person, any warning, encouragement, demand to protect themselves. He didn't say if any person, and you must tell people, threatens your life, makes you feel uncomfortable, tells you they're going to kill you, you need to call the police, get a restraining order, use the court system, do anything and everything you can to protect yourself. You have a right to feel safe. You shouldn't tolerate threats. You should file a restraining order. You should call the police if somebody tries to harm you. He didn't say that. He didn't tell anybody that. And he's supposed to be a therapist. And our responsibility, the bottom line in our profession, is saving lives. The bottom line. And he talks about he saved lives before. You sure didn't act like you cared about anybody's life when you talked about domestic violence. Because the bottom line is saving lives. That's it. And you didn't tell people. I'm telling people, you ever feel threatened, if anybody's threatening your life, anyone you love, care about, you hear about, before or after you get a restraining order, or anyone you know, call the cops, 911, get a restraining order, use the court system. Never, ever, ever tolerate threats of violence from any person. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous to think that you should have to put up with violence from any person, in or outside your family. It doesn't matter. Boyfriend, girlfriend, don't tolerate threats or violence. That is what Umar Johnson didn't tell you. But he canceled an event because he said his life is important, but yours isn't. Your life isn't important. But I bet you $1 million if you got killed through domestic violence, or a loved one of yours got killed through domestic violence, and you had an auto debit set up on his account, he wouldn't even tell you. If you walked up to him and said, "Oh, Umar, my relative, God forbid, got killed," he wouldn't tell you to cancel the auto debit. He'd keep taking the money. And it would take you a couple of seconds to get it canceled because you'd be distracted. That's Umar Johnson for you. Because he sure didn't give you any warning about how to care for yourself. He did address some things in the sexual sexual assault part, which I'm not going to go into now. That's another video. But that he said other things, and it had nothing to do with caring for you. He was insulting the women. So think about it, people. Umar Johnson doesn't care about you. He didn't even give you any safety tips. He didn't even talk about safety planning. Safety planning is priority. We're talking about domestic violence here, people. Safety planning is a priority. And that's what I go over the first time anybody comes to my office. That's part of my informed consent process. He doesn't even talk about safety planning. Doesn't care about you people. So I had to come on here, and I'm going to keep coming on here whenever Umar Johnson puts out garbage that he puts out like he did. Safety is priority for everybody. And I'm putting the links on here. Make sure you listen to what Umar Johnson says. He says you should not be in the courtroom, going to the courts to get help. You shouldn't be collaborating with the police to get help. He wants you to go to him. And he doesn't even answer phone calls. That's what Umar Johnson wants. He wants you only to go to him, the cult leader. Oh my God, this is sickening. So I keep saying, and I will continue to say, buyer beware. You trust Umar Johnson, you're putting your life literally in the hands of the devil incarnate. He doesn't care about you people. It's your decision to make. You put your children's life at risk. He's not even going to call for any protection if your children disclose that they're abused or molested in his care. When he goes on this trip, he's not going to even tell anybody about it. It's disgusting. Buyer beware.